My name is Imaad Majeed and I'm seated here with Anis Mustafa and Sharon, Dinasha, Stephen. And we're here to do a close reading of Charles Bernstein's In a Restless World Like This. Anis, would you like to give your first impression?
Oh, why don't you start?
Okay. So, while approaching the poem, we kind of tried to have our own uninitiated first impression kind of reading of it, and some of us tried to relate to it before trying to deconstruct it, while others tried to deconstruct it and then try and relate to it. The impression that we have in general is that it's an interior piece of writing and very much within the poet's mind that it's written. As Alfred Rees points out, there's a kind of nowhereness that is being written, it's being written within. Do you disagree with that?
Not entirely, but I think it could be related to more of the general context of people's lives than is evident at first reading. Because I was one who actually related to it while reading it, and it felt like a trip through the poem, and at the end it's sort of looking back, so it's self-referential in a sense, but you're also taking a journey. It's not just going in the same circle. So that's...
I think the title itself, even though the title is a reference to a song from pop culture, from American pop culture, the restless world like this is, and Al has this he's kind of adamant about how the word this has this kind of very important function in writing where you get to be really specific and really call something out. So we could even look at the poem as that restless world and a representation of it, but through a kind of stream of consciousness.
When I initially read it, I thought it was, well, it breaks from the norm of how a poem is generated. There is no path from A to Z, because when I read it the second time, it sounded like cerebral ramblings with no end to it. But it becomes a question, is it applicable to someone who is, well, on the other side of the world now? Is it meant for a particular audience, or from one introvert to another?
Is he writing for himself?
Yes.
Okay.
Or is he writing a general statement which applies to anyone? It's universal.
By being non-specific?
Yeah.
Okay. But the context is very specific, and when we go into the context of the poem, we realize that it's written not too long after 9/11, so not long ago. The very first line is kind of being specific to that time frame. And we've also talked about whether this poem is only important because of that particular time frame in which it exists, and whether that's what a lot of its context and its weight comes from.
But I find it interesting that there are very little signs of the times. You're looking at train tracks and rocks, and they're all things that have been there throughout time. Fortune tellers, for example.
So what you're saying, it doesn't confine it to a particular...
it doesn't tie it down to that time, even though it refers to it at the beginning.
It doesn't use a representational mode of doing that. It doesn't use very specific imagery at all throughout the poem.
But I guess that's what makes it like, gives it a character that doesn't use like specifics. There's like nothing specific in the poem that you can tell it relates to like the 9/11 scenario. It's just the title of the poem, and that is very specifically references something if you have heard that song and if you are like kind of aware of that cultural sphere.
But the song that it references is a very sweet song. It's nothing to do with...
It's also nostalgic though,
Yeah.
which this poem could be interpreted as from the first line and towards the end when it says, go on before the way back has become totally indivisible. It's kind of like you're looking back while being in the present moment that this is.
I think it's essentially that you bring your meaning to the poem. It's not so much that it gives you a set meaning, but you kind of you think of your own scenario and you kind of plug it in. And it works. It's sort of like a plug-and-play thing, whichever scenario you choose to bring to it.
Yeah. So we can safely say that the writer is very self-aware of how he's writing the poem, and maybe he's thought a lot about how the poem is going to be read.
And I think he's thought about how it reads backwards also, which is not something you usually do. Usually you start at one point and come to the end of the journey, but I think he's looked back on how it flows when you stand at the end point and look at the journey.
Yeah. What are the ways in which you can read this poem? You had looked at how the technical aspect of the enjambments and the line breaks, how they can offer different readings of the poem. So would you like to expand on that?
Yeah. For example, I really like this line, the turn around the corner, come at it, and then how it breaks into from all three sides at once. So you can either read on in a run-on line which says the turn around the corner, come at it from all three sides, which means you're taking a much broader view, or you can take it as the turn around the corner, come at it, and you're racing toward the corner. So there's, within the poem you're looking at, even looking at the poem, two different ways of looking at it.
It seems like a kind of taunt from the poet as well, come at the poem, come at it, and the turn around the corner, especially when you look at it in terms of ways of reading it, you can look at that turn around the corner as each line break, as each time that he bends, he turns around the corner, bounce the ball, and then he suddenly goes though to this bleary-eyed fortune. And then that word fortune, what does that mean there for you?
Well, it could be a reference to fate and how... Sorry?
Hope.
Hope, maybe. Or because lost hope, actually, since
Because
you're
it's
looking at
bleary-eyed.
bleary-eyed. Yeah. But then if you skip to the next bit of the line, it becomes fortune tellers, which I think is the way most people would initially see it, because you're looking at bleary-eyed and that refers to a person to you. But as Anis pointed out, even tellers has significance.
Is he referring, okay, by tellers, is he referring to us, the readers, other people who are going to read this poem, or
even maybe himself as the teller of the poem, the voice of the poem.
Or the voice in general, he's speaking of the idea of a teller, a person who is going to tell you. So it could be the media as well, and especially the word focus, and the other line that comes right after the fortune tellers, and then, well, you can see for yourselves, there's nothing up my sleeves. It's like he's saying, I'm...
Anything to do with bank tellers in there too.
Possibly
It's
financial.
like pointing to like language itself as like magic and like hocus pocus, and it's like blah 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 blah, and it's like casting spells, but there's no tricks up your sleeve. Like, I mean, there are some theories that propose like the original like use of language was magic, it's like spell, casting spell language, charming.
There is a
Charming
mysticism
aspect of it.
to this poem as well, when he brings in hocus pocus and the fortune tellers and having nothing up his sleeves, and then bringing this kind of semi-symbolic imagery of, it's not really imagery, the rocks occasionally break if pressure is applied.
And you notice it's gone from an abstract theme to something solid.
Something very real.
Yeah.
And very
Exactly.
simple
And this
also.
is soon after he says there's nothing up my sleeve. It's like he wants to distance himself from everything else.
He is distancing himself in a way, but he's also, from that distance, trying to look at a certain scenario while not really depicting the scenario. So that's that. Maybe that's that awareness that Al and others talk about. I feel like the poem in itself, how relevant is this poem going to be for you after, I mean, you've read this for the purpose of this close reading, but is there anything about this poem that you're going to hold on to?
I think it's the kind of poem that would stay with me because it's made me put so much of myself into it. Some poems you have the story and that's all, and you may relate to it, but in this allows you to bring your own scenarios into it. So that also allows you a variety of scenarios. So it could apply in a lot of different ways which you hadn't thought of the first time. So it's like the classics, you can reread them and they mean something else depending on where you are in your life.
Cool. But what if this poem was not written by Charles Bernstein and was not, would this poem still have been canonized? Would we be discussing it if it were written by just everyday, non-academic poet American?
I don't think it necessarily even has to be an American. It's anyone who wrote that poem has either put a lot of thought into it or has stumbled on something really good by accident, which I wouldn't complain about. Because you don't have to have all the credentials to be an effective poet. Maybe you can be a respected or renowned poet, but how effective you are doesn't really relate to how many credentials you have.
How about how effective the poem is in that sense?
That's what I mean, because essentially it doesn't matter who the poet was, but if the poet has if the poem has an impact, it has an impact. That's undeniable. If you go into it looking for an impact, well, that's an entirely different thing. What do you think?
How would you wrap up?
Well, I beg to differ because, opinions are subjective, and I feel if it's a complete nobody who's written it, is it worth the time to later on deciphering it, like to find out what he's talking about, to make sense of the poem? And we actually do it. We would, probably, yes, but what about the shelf life of the poem? Would it get passed down in that sense?
Yeah.
I believe the last name, the name of the person who wrote it carries a lot of weight here. Because it's like 14 lines.
It's a sonnet.
Yes. It would probably be, it could be dismissed as something that's very trying. If it's not by someone, well, in the case of Charles Bernstein, yes, we are going to spend time trying to decipher it, but for somebody else, I don't think that would be the case.
But I think something refreshing for me from this close reading of the poem was that I wasn't looking at the line breaks as multiple ways of reading the poem, and that the poem was actually, without having lots of imagery in a kind of Wittgensteinian sense, instead having using the structures of language and kind of playing with that to enable different readings to come through, even though that still doesn't really give you a lot of concrete imagery that's coming in as well. That was something that I didn't see in the poem, so now it has more of a, let's say, replay value, because I'm going to read it more to get at those other ways of reading it. Final word?
You?
Okay, so we'd like to thank Al Filbreeze at University of Pennsylvania for inviting us to conduct this close reading, and we'd like to say hi to everyone in the Modpo community. We're from Colombo, Sri Lanka. tiny little island that you need to Google and visit someday. So bye for now.